Now, to take this story further and discuss other sporting stories, we are joined by two respected SABC sports journalists. In studio with me is Mazola Molefe, and joining us via Zoom is Veile Mnyandu. Gentlemen, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on Sports on Morning Live.
Good morning, V.
Mazola, I'm going to start with you. Mazola. Let's talk about Coach Pitso Mosimane parting ways with Ahly. Surely it's not just a results-based decision, but there are other factors which we've heard them mention over various media outlets. Let's also talk about his relationship with the fitness coach Ukabelo, because some believe that it was possibly just the technical team issues around Ahly that made Coach Pitso say he's parting ways with the team.
Yeah, I think it's important to take it back to when Coach Pitso first left South Africa in 2020 to go to Egypt. There's been a lot of criticism from the legends, from some of the former players, and just the general feeling. Remember, Coach Pitso was a rare sort of appointment. You usually get European coaches or you get Egyptian-born coaches coaching a team of the century, and to have Coach Pitso there was unusual for the club. So it was at first it wasn't well received, despite his record, what he'd done for Sundowns. Over the past 8 years, I think he'd won about 13 or 14 trophies in the 7 or 8 years that he had been at the club. So that criticism just never subsided, even after winning back-to-back CAF Champions League titles, so I think the writing was on the wall, one would say. I think Aus Moira was here in studio with you last week. We had a conversation with her also for SABC Sport website as well, and she did allude that where there's smoke, there's fire. My understanding is that the club were trying to add an additional member of the technical team since Kevin Johnson had not been replaced. So perhaps maybe there was a misunderstanding there. I'm not too sure. Obviously, I'm not privy to the finer details of the meeting, the 3 meetings that took place. But as we now know, last night, Coach Pitso asked to leave the club.
Veza, let's bring you into this discussion. I mean, when we look at Coach Pitso and the avalanche of achievements and trophies, and Mazola has mentioned some of them now, surely any team that wants to get their hands on him, it's not going to come cheap. When we look at contenders of where he possibly could go, where to now for Pitso?
Well, V, I think in the last 21 months or to 22 months, I think when Coach Pitso spoke to us 2 weeks ago in Midrand, he spoke about himself as being the second longest surviving coach at Ahly, after the great Manuel Jose, who won 4 African Champions League titles. Coach Pitso winning 2 at Ahly in that short space of time, in fact taking them to 3 finals. So if you look at how his stock has risen, not only on the continent, but even abroad, especially in the Gulf region. For someone who was earning close to between 2.5 million rands to 3 million rands a month, surely he's out of range now for most African football markets, because he was at a top African club. So I think for me, it makes sense that he's been strongly linked with the clubs in Qatar and also in Saudi Arabia. I know that 2 weeks ago when he was here, there was a strong offer from Saudi Arabia. But I think with the news that his departure was imminent at Ahly, it has even made it easier for the other clubs that were looking for him in Qatar. And I have no doubt that that is where he's going to be, and for various reasons. I think in the last few weeks we've seen that it's more than just coaching now. It's also about brand Pitso, and this being a World Cup year as well. And I think where the World Cup is placed is also going to have a huge factor in how he decides, because TV work is also going to be very important for him in the last 6 months.
And I mean, Mazola, we can't have this conversation about Coach Pitso without touching on Percy Tau, because we know that as much as Pitso was getting criticism, so was Percy. And a lot of times Coach Pitso was finding himself having to protect and defend Percy. What happens to Percy now?
Yeah, I'll be honest, V. I'm concerned about Percy going forward. We know that he specifically signed for the club because of the coach that he'd worked with at Sundowns, sort of a father figure that Pitso had been to Percy for a number of years when he was growing up in the Sundowns youth, loaned out and coming back, winning the Champions League with Sundowns in 2016. He signed a four-year contract, so obviously there's still a number of years to go on his contract, and without the main guy that's brought him there. And I think we've seen this happen all over the world. When a player joins because of a coach, when that coach leaves, your future is almost uncertain. And I think Percy will probably feel in that situation where the person that's brought him there is no longer there. Yes. And we know that in North Africa they've been quite hostile. The reception, not only to the coach but to the player as well. So it will be interesting to see whether Percy sticks it out without Coach Pitso, or he tries to move back home or move within that same sort of space as well to the Gulf region. I'm sure Percy wouldn't be a player that's short of offers, I would think.
Yeah, no, it will be interesting to see what happens there. Veza, finally, as we wrap up this conversation around Pitso and Al Ahly, who's likely to step into his shoes and take over as the head coach at Al Ahly? Are there any names being thrown around at the moment?
I don't think, following the news early this morning from Cairo, and also having spoken to some of the colleagues there doesn't seem to be an immediate replacement that is ready to take over full time. And you must also understand that this comes at a critical time this week, when there's the Cairo derby against Zamalek over the weekend, with Ahly 7 points behind Zamalek, and with the 4 games in hand. And this is something that Coach Pitso had also said that he was so looking forward to do, because he leaves Ahly without having won a league title. So I know that there was talk of Carlos Queiroz, which is something that is a bit far-fetched when you look at that. Looks like Iran is looking at getting him back just before the World Cup. And also the Egyptian national team as well is feeling badly to have released him. There was talk of the former coach that Coach Pitso released, Veile, but I'm not sure if that is also possible given the circumstances on how he left to go back to Belgium. So I don't think this is going to be a quick decision that they are going to take in terms of how to replace him.
Certainly. All right, Mazola, let's move the conversation to Bafana Bafana. Now, we saw them last week, Thursday, playing in the AFCON qualifier against Morocco. They started quite strong, but I mean, towards the end, not really the type of result we were looking for. Can they still get this campaign back on track? Because I know a lot of South Africans were so happy that Zimbabwe is no longer part of that group, and just thinking, well, we need 2 wins and we're good for AFCON 2023.
Yeah, look, I think this is the easiest path Bafana are ever going to come across in terms of qualifying for a major competition like the AFCON. 3 teams, 2 will qualify to go to Ivory Coast next year. Bafana only need to beat Liberia in the coming qualifiers. We know they have Morocco up next, though. That's another tough hill battle, but at least it's at home. Hopefully we move beyond the 50% capacity at the stadium to at least have our own crowd backing the team. Like we saw in Rabat, I think Morocco were quite inspired by the supporters in the stands, hence they managed to come from behind, and quite a strong and solid performance. I thought Bafana, played in patches, but I think they can still rescue it. I think, as I said, this is, in my opinion, the easiest qualification process Bafana can ever come across. If we can't qualify for an expanded AFCON, then I think we are, punching above our weight if we think we can get to a World Cup.
Certainly, and it will be interesting to see how Bafana Bafana use this opportunity. Veza, just quickly before we wrap up, let's talk about the promotion relegation playoffs. I mean, it's been quite interesting watching this battle between Tuks as well as Swallows FC. How do you seeing this one unfold? Will Swallows retain their PSL status, or are Tuks coming back into the DStv Premiership?
Just a bit on what you've just discussed. It was interesting. I watched Liberia playing what maybe I would call a weekend Morocco last night. And it was interesting looking at that because the Moroccans are not really happy with their coach, and they were missing a number of stars yesterday. And the turnout in Casablanca compared to Rabat, it was half the spectators we saw last week, but they labored to a 2-0 win. And I think I agree with Mazola there. We shouldn't struggle against Liberia. Even a draw and a win should be enough on head-to-head. But I think on what you are talking about, one of the biggest problems, and we had picked this up with the Swallows coach before they started with the playoffs, is that Swallows has got a number of players who are on loan. And it also means that those players, they go into the games half-heartedly. And this has been the problem. All they needed was just a win this past weekend against All Stars, and they looked to be cruising after that goal from Magaman. But unfortunately, defensively, they were found wanting. They couldn't manage the game, something that they've struggled to do. When it comes to the playoffs, it's always about which team wants it the most.
Yes.
And I think tomorrow that could just be what we're going to see against Amatax, because a draw for them will be enough to end promotion.
Certainly, Mazola, I'm going to throw the same question to you just to get your thoughts on who you think will be in the PSL next season.
It's tough. I think Swallows, if you look at the history of the playoffs, a lot of the teams that finish, in that playoff position in the top flight, usually, because they've got, stronger players, better pedigree, they usually make it. But Sundowns are defying the odds a little bit. And I think Amatax, have momentum, and all they need is a draw. But I think if you look at the makeup of the squad at Swallows and the depth and the coach that's at the helm, all they need, like Veile was saying, is just to push for a win, which they could have gotten away at Cape Town Spurs. So if I had to put my head on the block, I'd say Swallows have enough depth to win a home game that guarantees their job security. At the end of the day, that's what it is. It's their job security. If you move from being in a top flight, you move from getting 2.5 million a month in grants to a fraction of that if you get relegated.
Certainly. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time here this morning. We have unfortunately run out of time. Thank you, Mazola. Thank you, Veile. We are certainly going to try and get the gentlemen back in studio again. So much still to talk about. We've seen a lot of movements in the PSL. That would have been an interesting one. The Buccaneers still without a head coach. That also would have been very interesting to talk about.